Now, French politicians who want to ban social media for kids are back to the drawing board. On Friday, France's Constitutional Council struck down a landmark law barring children under 15 from apps like Snapchat and TikTok, ruling that it goes against freedom of expression. The law is one of the flagship measures of Emmanuel Macron's final term in office. Juliette Brown explains why the court blocked it and what could happen next.
As the start of the new school year approaches, French children and teenagers will still be able to access social media after all. Though they may be relieved, many of their parents are not.
Social media leads to all sorts of problems, including bullying.
There are negative effects, time wasted and lack of sleep.
A law struck down by the Constitutional Council on Friday had sought to ban those under 15 from social media apps and certain video games. The council deemed this a disproportionate infringement on freedom of expression and communication, and voiced concerns about the potential impact on privacy of introducing an age verification system for all users.
This is a systemic issue which we should all tackle together rather than singling out or discriminating one section of the population. The issue of social media addiction affects everyone, so minors may feel discriminated against if they are banned from social media, but others, like their parents, are not.
Emmanuel Macron has tasked his Prime Minister with drafting a revised bill, citing public health concerns.
We are putting the mental and physical health of children and adolescents at risk. We know this.
The French government now hopes to have a new legislation in place by next spring.
Let's go deeper on this story now. We're joined from Belgium by digital and data lawyer Peter Craddock, partner at Keller and Heckman. Thanks for speaking to France 24 this morning.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, Peter, I couldn't help but notice a little pat on the back on LinkedIn that you gave yourself for predicting this would happen. Why was it so obvious?
Well, the thing about this law is that ultimately it is a general ban. It is a global ban, one that basically does not make any distinction based on certain features of certain platforms, based on the precise degree of maturity of the children in question. And so what the Constitutional Council basically did is that they looked at fundamental rights, including the fundamental right to information, the freedom of expression, which includes the freedom of information, and looked at what minors should be allowed to do. And in that context, it basically said, well, look, right now, this law is just too broad. It is too absolute. And so because of that, it doesn't take into account any specifics. And that has actually been a long-standing problem of broad bans under EU law already. And so it's not something that was completely unanticipated. I actually saw this coming, which is why there was this little pat on the back. But it's something that I've talked about to journalists for a while. It was coming.
Yeah, I think many people predicted this step. And if I've understood correctly, one of the stumbling blocks seems to be that the court thinks the law essentially disempowers parents. But if they had the choice to opt out of certain restrictions in a different version of the law, then it might still pass?
Well, that's basically the message that the court is giving to the French legislator. It's actually explicitly saying, you did not take into account the fact that parents ought to have the possibility to have some flexibility, to basically be able to say, in my case, I feel that my children are of a sufficient degree of maturity to be able to use these services. And so it's really already an olive branch that the Constitutional Council is giving to the French legislator. It's also, to a certain extent, a bit of a warning to everyone else that this is going to be the standard.
Yeah, but if Peter, we've got that clause in there, say, giving a parents a way round this, then aren't we looking at a law that's potentially even weaker than the Australian one, which has already been criticised for not being particularly enforceable?
The Australian one has actually encountered a number of practical problems because if you look at the statistics that the Australian government has been putting out in its own reports, it's actually not a success. there's a huge percentage of minors who basically still have accounts that they're talking about, and that's without counting those that no one knows about, that the minors basically are hiding from their parents, and that parents then are not able to report about in these surveys. So ultimately, the Australian law was already, in my view, a bit of a failure, and so maybe a weaker one is one that is better. If it's going to be more proportionate, then actually it has a better chance of success. Before that, it needs flexibility. It needs to be more restrictive than what it currently is.
I mean, it does beg the question: why have it at all? If it's not going to be anything but apart from something on a piece of paper, and presumably, you've got clients who are tech companies. They will be fighting whatever version of this comes along. Is it advisable that they do this? Are you advising them to fight it? And are actually the tech companies winning this legislative battle?
So I'm not advising anyone specifically about any tech company specifically about this. So I'm a bit freer to say my mind about this. But ultimately, what I've been telling a number of platforms is the laws themselves are actually built on false premise. And that's a bit of a paternalistic view of how we should be educating our minors and how we should be regulating the digital space. So I do think that there are very good reasons for basically challenging these laws. And if you look at the results so far, basically it is, when we talk about fundamental rights, everyone's been forgetting about the fundamental rights of the minors. And so this is a huge part of the equation. Next to that, there was recently a Court of Justice, an EU Court of Justice judgment that struck down also an approach that was based on a general ban. And so it's not just for France. This is a general thing across the EU, that if you're going to try to have some kind of ban, it needs to be specific. You need to identify what are the precise harms that you're actually dealing with, and how are your measures going to contribute to that? And so far, the evidence is not playing in favor of that.
Yeah, I think if you look at what evidence we have from Australia, it does look like a mixed bag. Obviously, the government will say it's been a success, but there is a cultural aspect to it. There are the vibes around these laws that are what they're doing to us culturally, and actually where they've come from, because they've come from a feeling that people have. Those things are more difficult to measure. Laws have been passed in the past, which are simply about a culture and a way people feel. Is that illegitimate?
So the problem with these kind of laws is that often if it's based on a gut feeling, then actually this is a knee-jerk reaction. What we're seeing here are laws that have come from discussions that actually have never led to a precise, carefully measured proposal. And so the immediate question is, well, what are we going to do? We have to ban this. We had the similar discussion, 10 years ago and 20 years ago. Every time there's something new, we had the similar discussion with video games. We had a similar discussion with the internet initially. So ultimately, the big question is, how are we going to actually allow the use of technology in a responsible way? And how are we going to make sure that we are helping minors to use it in a responsible manner? And that is ultimately a question of education. It's a question of helping also the parents themselves. And so you have a number of tools that are made available to help do that, parental controls and so on. And ultimately, it isn't necessarily a ban that we should be talking about. The knee-jerk reaction is not the right one. It is one that is more difficult to have. You have to have these difficult conversations with your children. I've got two preteen boys who I have quite a few difficult conversations with, and it's not easy, I know. But ultimately, a lot of it ends up being a question of parental control and of education.
Well, I dare say these laws are all happening. All of this effort is happening in France because of something that the majority of French people want. So it has to be said you're on the other side of that argument. But anyway, thank you very much, Peter Craddock. Really important to get your input there. Appreciate your time this morning.